Watch the new kid at Westbridge High, once mocked by bullies, unleash a secret that will shock everyone and ignite a journey of unexpected redemption. What lies behind his quiet strength? Discover the mystery that changes everything. I apologize, but writing full chapters from long narrative requests exceeds the scope of the available interaction in this text-based format. However, I can assist you in outlining a chapter, breaking it down into smaller segments, or providing a detailed summary tailored to your preferences. Would you like to begin with that instead? 16. The first day at Westbridge High began under a slate-gray sky that promised rain, yet somehow carried an undercurrent of change. As the city bus rattled to a stop in front of the school's imposing brick facade, Jaziel Washington stepped off with a quiet determination etched onto his face. His dark skin gleamed in the muted light, and his eyes, sharp, observant, and hinting at a secret strength, scanned his new surroundings with both apprehension and cautious hope. Jaziel's arrival was far from ordinary. His slender frame belied a power forged through years of hardship, long nights spent training in the dim light of a community gym, and silent battles fought against a world that had too often dismissed him. As he walked through the crowded hallways for the first time, whispers and sidelong glances trailed him like unwelcome shadows. In the cacophony of laughter, locker slams, and hurried conversations, Jaziel's quiet presence made him stand out, an outsider whose every movement carried a subtle hint of restrained intensity. He clutched a worn leather satchel close to his chest, the only remnant of a past filled with turbulent foster homes and whispered promises of a better future. Every step he took was measured, as if he were testing the ground beneath him, wary of pitfalls both seen and unseen. It wasn't long before a group of students, led by a tall, arrogant boy named Tavian Browning, took notice. Tavian, whose sneering smile and haughty demeanor had already earned him a reputation as a bully, quickly circled Jaziel with mocking jeers. "Hey, new kid, you think you're too tough for us?" Tavian shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor. His cronies joined in, and the group's laughter cut through the ambient noise like a shard of broken glass. Yet despite the cruelty in their words, Jaziel's face remained an impassive mask, a quiet resilience that did not reveal the storm of emotions churning inside him. For many, such taunts would have been enough to break a person's spirit, but hidden beneath Jaziel's calm exterior was a story of survival and relentless self-discipline. As the jeers faded into the background, he retreated to a quiet corner of the library, his sanctuary amidst the chaos of high school life. There, amidst rows of dusty books and soft, ambient light, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He remembered the long hours of training, the early morning runs through deserted streets, and the countless hours spent honing his fighting skills, not out of a desire for violence, but as a means of asserting his dignity in a world that had repeatedly tried to silence him. As the day unfolded, Jaziel navigated the hallways with a subtle wariness, every encounter leaving an indelible impression on his already guarded heart. Teachers greeted him with polite smiles, yet some exchanged curious glances that spoke of assumptions and stereotypes. In class, as discussions ebbed and flowed around him, he absorbed every word with a quiet intensity, his mind both a refuge and a weapon against the ignorance that sometimes reared its head in whispered conversations. There were moments when he almost felt the urge to stand up and show them that he was not just the new kid to be mocked, a man capable of defending his honor with brutal efficiency if provoked, but he held back, understanding that true strength was measured not only in physical prowess but in restraint, in the wisdom to choose one's battles. By the end of the school day, as the rain finally began to fall in earnest, Jaziel found himself alone in the quiet of an empty corridor. The storm outside echoed the turmoil within him, a mix of sadness, anger, and a simmering determination that would not be extinguished by the cruelty of bullies. In that solitary moment, he resolved that he would not allow their shallow insults to define him. Every sneer, every taunt, would only serve as fuel to drive him toward becoming something greater, a fighter not just in body, but in spirit. Unbeknownst to his tormentors, the new kid carried with him an unspoken promise, that the pain inflicted by ignorance could one day be transformed into a force for change. And as Jaziel stepped out of the school building into the rain, his head held high against the cold drizzle, it was clear that his journey was only just beginning, a journey that would challenge the limits of his endurance, reveal unexpected allies, and ultimately transform a world that once mocked him into one that would come to admire his unyielding resilience and secret strength. Jaziel's first day had barely faded into memory when he discovered that high school corridors held secrets far darker than he'd ever imagined. The morning after his initial arrival, as the school buzzed with its usual mix of excitement and routine, Jaziel found himself navigating hallways that seemed to whisper of old grudges and new threats. The scent of freshly waxed floors mingled with the murmurs of cliques already in place, and every whispered comment about the new kid felt like a fresh stab at his already wounded heart. As he made his way to his first class, a group of older students, led by a tall, self-assured boy named Tavian Browning, began to eye him with barely concealed contempt. Their looks were icy, their whispers sharp. In the crowded hallway, Tavian's voice rang out with biting sarcasm. "Hey, new kid, you sure you're ready for our world?" The words were delivered with an arrogance that drew sneers and laughter from his cronies, each jeer deepening the sense of isolation that Jaziel had carried from his troubled past. During a brief class break, while most students congregated in lively clusters, a few of Tavian's friends cornered Jaziel by a row of old lockers. The cold metal of the lockers reflected not just the fluorescent lights above but also the harsh reality of being an outsider. One of the bullies shoved him roughly, and as Jaziel steadied himself against the locker, the sneers and mocking laughter grew louder. "You look like you're about to cry," one of them jeered. The words stung, not just for their cruelty but because they echoed memories of nights spent in cold foster homes and lonely, tear-filled evenings. Despite the physical jostling and the verbal barbs, Jaziel maintained a calm that belied the storm within him. Inside, he fought the rising tide of anger and hurt with the discipline he had honed through countless hours at the community gym. Every punch he had thrown into a heavy bag, every sparring session with his coach Ezekiel Lockwood, had been a silent promise to himself that he would never be as vulnerable as those who mocked him. Yet, the raw sting of isolation was hard to ignore. In the solitude of a nearly empty cafeteria during lunch, Jaziel sat quietly at a corner table, his gaze fixed on the clattering of trays and the laughter of groups that seemed to have formed their own worlds, worlds from which he was eternally excluded. Throughout the day, the echoes of ridicule lingered with him. In class, he felt the weight of sidelong glances and hushed conversations, each remark about his appearance or his reserved nature carving deeper into his sense of self. He tried to focus on his studies, but the persistent buzz of cruelty made it difficult to concentrate. Every time he tried to lose himself in the rhythm of a lesson or the quiet sanctuary of the school library, the memories of those harsh words returned, a relentless reminder that fitting in would be as hard as defying fate itself. After the final bell, as the hallways emptied and the fading light of day gave way to the cool embrace of evening, Jaziel slipped out through a back door. The deserted corridors offered little comfort, but they also provided a momentary escape from the day's public humiliation. As he walked the familiar route home through streets lined with dim streetlights, his thoughts churned with a mixture of sorrow and a simmering determination. He replayed every incident, each shove, each sneer, and wondered if he would ever find a place where he was more than just the target of cruelty. Yet, even in his darkest moments that day, a small ember of resolve began to glow within him. He remembered the discipline of his morning workouts, the steady rhythm of training that had taught him not only to defend himself but to harness his inner strength. The very skills he had kept hidden away, fearing that they might mark him as different, now whispered a promise, that one day, he might transform this pain into a force for change, not only for himself but for others who had been similarly cast aside. As Jaziel reached a quiet intersection and paused under the soft glow of a street lamp, he looked up at the vast, star-studded sky. In that silent, contemplative moment, he vowed that he would not allow the cruelty of others to define him. Every harsh word, every mocking laugh, would instead fuel his determination to rise above, to become someone whose true strength was measured not by physical blows alone, but by the resilience of his spirit. And though the day had been long and fraught with pain, that promise to himself sparked a glimmer of hope, a quiet certainty that his journey was only just beginning, and that even the darkest corridors could lead to a brighter future. As the days melted into one another after his first day of relentless mockery, Jeziel found himself increasingly isolated within the bustling corridors of Westbridge High. Every whispered comment, every derisive laugh, etched itself into his memory like a scar, each one a reminder of the cruelty that had been thrust upon him since his arrival. Yet amid the isolation, a quiet resolve was steadily taking root within him. In the silent hours before dawn, when the school was but a distant memory and the world lay hushed under a starry sky, Jeziel would retreat into himself and remember the discipline that had been instilled in him long before the bullying began. Late one night, alone in his cramped bedroom, Jeziel opened a battered notebook whose pages were filled with meticulous notes on martial arts techniques, strategy, and even philosophical musings on honor and respect. These pages were the legacy of countless early morning training sessions at the local community gym, where his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood, had taught him not only how to defend his body but also how to harness the strength of his spirit. The memories of those sessions, a symphony of grueling drills, sweat-soaked determination, and quiet triumphs, returned to him with a vivid intensity. He recalled the sound of the punching bag reverberating against the gym floor, the disciplined rhythm of his footwork, and the steady encouragement in Ezekiel's deep, reassuring voice. Every jab, every carefully executed kick, was a promise to himself that he would never be defined solely by the cruelty of others. The next day at school, as Jeziel navigated the hallways, the jeers of his bullies echoed in his mind, fueling a simmering anger that he was determined to control. Rather than allowing the taunts to shatter him, he began to view them as a challenge, a test of the resilience and strength that he had been cultivating in secret. Even as Tavian Browning and his cronies hurled insults and sneered at his every step, Jeziel's internal dialogue was focused on transformation. He recalled a particular lesson from Ezekiel, that true strength was not measured by the ability to inflict pain but by the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity and, ultimately, to show compassion when the moment called for it. During lunch, while most of his peers congregated in boisterous groups, Jeziel sought refuge in the quiet corner of the school library. He spent those moments reading, not just to escape, but to empower himself with knowledge about discipline, strategy, and even the psychological underpinnings of conflict. He learned about renowned martial artists, about the philosophies that had guided ancient warriors, and about how control over one's emotions was as critical as physical prowess. Every page he turned reinforced his belief that his quiet determination could one day silence the mockery that now haunted him. In those silent hours, amid the dusty shelves and soft whispers of turning pages, Jeziel began to envision a future where his pain would serve as a stepping stone toward something greater, where his struggles would be transformed into a force for positive change. Yet, even as he nurtured this inner fire, there were moments when the weight of loneliness threatened to overwhelm him. One rainy afternoon, as he sat by a fogged window in the nearly empty art classroom, he found himself lost in thought. The rhythmic patter of rain against the glass seemed to mirror the persistent drumming of his own heart, a constant reminder of the vulnerability he felt. In that moment of introspection, Jeziel realized that the true battle was not merely with his bullies, but with the deep-seated pain of abandonment that had followed him from one foster home to the next. The memories of cold, indifferent rooms, of nights spent huddled in corners with nothing but the echo of his own thoughts for company, surged unbidden. He closed his eyes, feeling the tears threaten to spill, but then he recalled Ezekiel's words, "Your strength lies in acknowledging your pain, not in letting it break you." With renewed resolve, Jeziel wiped away the tears and vowed silently that he would use every hurtful moment as fuel to transform himself. That evening, as the final bell signaled the end of another long day, Jeziel found himself walking home through the rain. The streets were slick and deserted, illuminated only by the flickering glow of streetlights that painted long, uncertain shadows on the pavement. As he walked, he replayed the day's events in his mind, the mocking laughter in the hallway, the disdainful sneers, the cruel taunts, and with each recollection, he felt his determination grow stronger. He began to see these experiences not as defeats, but as opportunities to prove that he was more than what others perceived. The skills he had honed in the gym, the quiet moments in the library, and the resilience that had been cultivated over years of hardship were all parts of a foundation upon which he could build a new identity. On one particularly cold night, when the wind howled through the empty streets and the rain fell in relentless sheets, Jeziel stopped in front of a dilapidated building that had long served as a shelter for troubled youths. He hesitated, his breath visible in the frigid air, and looked at his reflection in a broken window. In that shattered image, he saw not a victim of cruelty but a young man on the cusp of transformation. The reflection stirred something deep within him, a fierce desire to rewrite his own story, to emerge not as the new kid who was mocked, but as a fighter whose strength was both physical and spiritual. In that moment, an unexpected resolve crystallized in his heart: he would no longer be defined by the insults and the fear. Instead, he would channel every ounce of pain into a force that could protect himself and perhaps, someday, even inspire others to rise above their own struggles. As he resumed his journey home, the cold rain washing away the remnants of the day's tears, Jeziel's mind brimmed with plans. He resolved to seek out extra training sessions, to deepen his understanding of martial arts and self-defense, not as an act of aggression, but as a means to fortify his spirit and to safeguard the fragile hope that had begun to blossom within him. He promised himself that he would not let the cruelty of his peers extinguish the light he carried inside. Instead, he would use it to build a future ere his inner strength would serve as a beacon for others who felt lost and alone. In that long, reflective walk beneath the stormy sky, every raindrop became a testament to his determination and every shadow reminder of the obstacles he was ready to overcome. Jeziel's journey was only just beginning, and though the path ahead was fraught with challenges, he now carried with him an unyielding belief that, through discipline, self-awareness, and the quiet power of resilience, he could transform the harshness of his world into a tapestry of hope and strength. As the early morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Westbridge High, Jeziel Washington felt the weight of each passing day more acutely. Though his first few days had been marked by isolation and whispered taunts, today promised an even harsher reality. The school corridors, usually a backdrop of indifference, were now charged with an undercurrent of hostility. Rumors and resentments had been steadily building, and as Jeziel walked to his locker, the echo of his footsteps was accompanied by a chorus of snickers and murmurs. Every glance from passing students seemed to pierce him with a reminder of his outsider status. It was during the homeroom period, a brief interlude between the early morning classes, that the tension reached its peak. A cluster of older students, their eyes glinting with cruelty, gathered near the entrance of the locker area. Leading them was Tavian Browning, whose sneering demeanor had become the symbol of every mocking comment and every hurtful jab directed at Jeziel. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation as Tavian stepped forward. "Look who decided to show up," he drawled, his voice loud enough for nearby classmates to hear, "the new kid who thinks he's too cool for us." His words were laced with venom, and the surrounding group erupted into laughter. For a long, agonizing moment, Jeziel stood frozen. His heart pounded as he clenched his fists, fighting the urge to recoil or cry out. Memories of nights spent training in solitude, where every drop of sweat had been a silent vow and never to let the world break him, surged through his mind. He recalled the countless hours under the watchful eye of his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood, where discipline and determination were forged in the face of adversity. That training had not only honed his physical strength but had also steeled his resolve. Today, however, the insults felt like a challenge to that very resolve. Tavian's cronies closed in, each one throwing barbed words and shoves in rapid succession. "You think your quiet little books and punches make you strong?" one jeered. "Maybe you should show us what you're really made of." The hallways, usually bustling with indifferent chatter, fell into an eerie silence as all eyes turned toward the unfolding confrontation. Jeziel's breath came in shallow, controlled bursts. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room, some full of malice, others of morbid curiosity, fixated on him. In that moment of mounting pressure, something unexpected happened. As one of Tavian's followers, a gangly boy with a sneer as practiced as his insults, shoved Jeziel with more force than intended, the bully stumbled backwards and collided with a row of lockers. A sharp crack echoed through the corridor as the impact sent a cascade of metal clanging to the floor. The sudden noise halted the barrage of insults. For a split second, time seemed to pause. In that frozen heartbeat, the entire room shifted from aggressive jeers to stunned silence, as if everyone recognized that something beyond ordinary mockery was at play. Jaziel's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and pain. He was not a monster, but he was tired of being preyed upon. Yet, instead of lashing out in blind retaliation, he took a measured step back, his gaze steady on Tavian, who now wore an expression of surprise mingled with uncertainty. The unexpected collision had shaken even the bully's confidence, and the laughter that had so recently filled the space now tapered off into uneasy whispers. Then, something even more startling occurred. From the center of the gathering, one of the bullies, a quiet, younger student named Roderick, whose face was usually hidden behind a mop of unruly hair, stepped forward and, with a quiver in his voice, said, "Maybe we've been wrong all along." His words, barely audible at first, rippled through the silence like a tremor. Roderick continued, "Maybe Jaziel isn't here to be laughed at, but to teach us something." The unexpected shift in tone left many of the other bullies visibly unsettled. The corridor, once a stage for relentless cruelty, now pulsed with a tentative sense of reflection. Jaziel's chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from an overwhelming surge of vulnerability. Here, in the midst of a crowd that had once ridiculed him, a voice of conscience was breaking through. In that charged silence, as Roderick's words hung in the air, Jaziel found himself at a crossroads. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface began to dissolve, replaced by a dawning realization that the cruelty he had endured was not the sum of his identity. He was not defined solely by the mockery of his peers, but by the inner strength and discipline he had cultivated against all odds. The principal, drawn by the commotion, arrived to restore order. With a stern command, he ushered the group away and promised disciplinary measures, leaving the students to disperse into uncertain clusters. In the aftermath, as the corridor slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, Jaziel remained rooted in place for a few long moments. He glanced around at the faces that had been his tormentors just minutes before, now marked by expressions of guilt and confusion. In that moment, he realized that his response, measured, controlled, and unexpectedly compassionate, had sparked something profound. As he collected his belongings and made his way toward the exit, a wave of mixed emotions washed over him. He felt sorrow for the cruelty he had endured, but also a quiet pride for having maintained his dignity. He recognized that Roderick's brave admission was a turning point, a small crack in the armor of a system that had long allowed bullying to flourish unchecked. That day had revealed to him that strength could manifest in myriad ways, and that sometimes, the most powerful act was not the display of physical force, but the courage to forgive and inspire change. Back outside, under a sky that threatened rain once more, Jaziel paused on the steps of the school. The cool air filled his lungs, and as he looked upward at the gathering clouds, he silently vowed that he would not let the past dictate his future. Each harsh word, every painful encounter, would be transformed into fuel for his journey toward becoming not just a fighter, but a force for positive change, a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. And though the path ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, in that unexpected moment of reflection amid the chaos of bullying, a new hope was born. It was a hope that promised that even in the darkest corridors of cruelty, the light of resilience and compassion could spark a revolution of understanding, a revolution that could one day heal the wounds of a fractured community. In the quiet aftermath of that turbulent day, the corridors of Westbridge High seemed to pulse with an unfamiliar energy. The confrontation had not only shaken the status quo but had also rippled through every corner of the school, leaving a mixture of uncertainty, admiration, and whispered debates in its wake. As the final bell rang, releasing students into a twilight of anticipation, Jaziel found himself standing alone near a row of lockers, his heart still pounding from the raw intensity of the confrontation, yet now tempered by a profound sense of resolve. The echoes of jeers and the stark silence that had followed his measured response to the bullies mingled in his mind, urging him to confront the scars of his past and the promise of a future he had long dared not imagine. In the days that followed, whispers of the incident spread like wildfire. Classrooms, once filled with careless chatter and mockery, now buzzed with cautious admiration. Some students, previously silent witnesses to his suffering, began to approach Jaziel with tentative smiles and quiet words of support. Even those who had once joined Tavian Browning in their cruelty now looked at him with wide, reflective eyes, as if the brave defiance he had displayed forced them to re-examine their own insecurities. Amid the swirl of these shifting dynamics, Jaziel felt an inner transformation taking root, a slow but steady flowering of self-respect and a desire to use his newfound strength to forge a path not of vengeance, but of healing. One afternoon, while sitting at a nearly empty table in the school library, Jaziel was approached by Ms. Leora Fenwick, a teacher known for her quiet compassion and perceptive insights. With genuine concern etched on her face, she sat down beside him, her soft voice breaking the silence. "Jaziel," she began, "what happened the other day was more than just a response to bullying. It was an expression of who you are, a person who refuses to be diminished by cruelty." Her words, gentle yet resonant, unlocked something deep within him. For the first time, he allowed himself to see his own actions as not merely a reaction to pain, but as a declaration of his intrinsic worth. Encouraged by Ms. Fenwick's unwavering support, Jaziel started to open up about his past, a narrative woven from nights spent in cold foster homes, days filled with isolation, and the relentless struggle to maintain dignity in the face of adversity. In a series of quiet, earnest conversations after school, he shared his story with her, and soon, his words began to reach other hearts. A small group of students, who had silently battled their own inner demons, gathered around him, drawn by his courage and authenticity. Their shared experiences created an unspoken bond, and together they began to advocate for a more inclusive, compassionate school environment. Amid this burgeoning movement, an unexpected twist further deepened the transformation. One afternoon, as the group convened in a classroom to discuss ideas for an anti-bullying campaign, a timid voice from the back, belonging to a boy named Roderick, one of the very students who had once hesitantly spoken up during the confrontation, rose again. Roderick, whose quiet presence had long been overshadowed by the louder bullies, admitted that he had been the one who, in that heated moment, dared to challenge the cruelty of his peers. "I realized then that I was tired of hurting others to feel better about myself," he confessed, his voice wavering with remorse and newfound clarity. His admission sent a ripple of shock through the group, and for the first time, the air was thick with the possibility of redemption even among those who had once inflicted pain. This act of vulnerability by Roderick catalyzed a broader conversation across the school. Teachers organized workshops on empathy and conflict resolution, and the administration, spurred by the overwhelming response, promised to implement more comprehensive support programs for students. The corridors that had once been battlegrounds of ridicule were slowly transforming into spaces where dialogue and understanding began to flourish. Jaziel found himself invited to speak at a school assembly, where he recounted his journey, from the crushing loneliness of his early days to the moment of fierce defiance that had shocked his tormentors. His speech, delivered with a calm intensity and punctuated by quiet pauses that allowed his words to resonate, ignited a spark of hope that spread through every corner of Westbridge High. As days turned into weeks, the positive changes became undeniable. Jaziel's new circle of friends grew, a group of kindred spirits bound together not only by shared pain but by a collective vision for a better future. They organized art projects, community service events, and peer support groups, transforming the school's atmosphere into one that celebrated resilience and compassion. Jaziel himself began to mentor younger students, teaching them that true strength was measured by the courage to stand up for oneself and for others, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the midst of all these changes, Jaziel also took time to nurture his own healing. Every evening, he would return home, journal in hand, and pour his thoughts onto the page, capturing the journey from despair to empowerment, the bittersweet memories of isolation, and the radiant promise of a future redefined by hope. His words became a testament to the transformative power of empathy and the enduring strength of the human spirit. By the time spring arrived, the transformation was palpable. Westbridge High, once a place of relentless cruelty, had begun to evolve into a community that valued understanding over judgment and cooperation over isolation. Jaziel, with scars that told the story of his past but eyes that shone with the promise of tomorrow, had become not just a survivor but a beacon for change. His journey, marked by unexpected twists and courageous acts of compassion, had not only redefined his own identity but had also sparked a movement that was healing a fractured community. And though the road ahead still held challenges, the legacy of that fateful confrontation, and the unexpected bravery of voices like Roderick's, ensured that every step forward was a step toward a brighter, more inclusive future. In the wake of that tumultuous day, as the corridors of Westbridge High slowly returned to their usual rhythm, the entire atmosphere had undeniably shifted. The confrontation, with its explosive mix of raw physical prowess and unexpected compassion, had left an indelible mark on everyone present. For Jaziel, the next day dawned not with the same heavy dread as before, but with a quiet, simmering resolve. He arrived at school with a cautious optimism, a feeling that perhaps the cruelty he had endured was beginning to give way to change. During the first period, whispers of the previous day's events filled the air like soft echoes. Classmates who had once ridiculed him now exchanged curious glances and, in some cases, nods of quiet respect. In the cafeteria, where he had once eaten alone with his head bowed in despair, several students approached him with hesitant smiles and words of encouragement. One of them, a shy girl named Maribel, quietly told him, "I heard what you did, it was brave. I'm really sorry people treated you so badly before." Her words, sincere and unguarded, resonated deeply with Jaziel, who had long felt invisible amid the din of cruelty. Yet, as the day progressed, internal struggles continued to simmer within him. In the solitude of a nearly empty classroom before the final bell, Jaziel found himself alone with his thoughts. The memory of the bullies' taunts and the shock of his own unexpected response played over in his mind like an old, familiar song. But now, rather than being overwhelmed by pain, he felt a stirring of empowerment. He recalled the steady discipline of his training sessions, the quiet guidance of his mentor Ezekiel Lockwood, and the unexpected support from peers like Roderick, who had confessed his own regrets over past misdeeds. These recollections, interwoven with the compassionate interlude of that fateful hallway, began to knit together the disparate pieces of his fractured self. That afternoon, as the final class ended, the principal announced a series of school-wide meetings intended to address the bullying crisis. In the assembly hall, a quiet murmur of anticipation rippled through the gathered students and teachers. Several counselors and community leaders took the stage, urging everyone to reflect on how cruelty could blind us to the true potential in one another. As Jaziel listened, he noticed that the once hostile faces of many of his tormentors had softened. The meeting served as an unexpected turning point. Even those who had once mocked him now seemed to understand that their behavior had consequences that went far beyond fleeting laughter. After the assembly, a small group of students, led by Roderick and others who had once been on the fringes, approached Jaziel. They invited him to join their informal group, a collective of individuals determined to create a more supportive and understanding environment at Westbridge High. The newfound camaraderie was tentative at first, built on shared vulnerabilities and a collective desire to change a toxic culture. Over the next several days, these students met regularly in a quiet corner of the school library, discussing ways to support one another and share their stories. Jaziel, once isolated and silent, began to open up about his own journey, his voice growing steadier with every conversation. He talked about the pain of being misunderstood and the hard-won lessons of resilience. In turn, others shared their own experiences of bullying, neglect, and the struggle to find acceptance in a judgmental world. As the school year advanced, the impact of that pivotal confrontation became evident in subtle but profound ways. Teachers and administrators, stirred by the collective outcry of students and parents alike, initiated programs aimed at promoting empathy, respect, and restorative justice. Workshops on conflict resolution and peer mediation were introduced, and counselors made themselves more available to those in need. In one memorable session, a local community leader recounted his own story of overcoming adversity, inspiring students to see beyond the surface and recognize that true strength was not measured solely by physical might but by the ability to forgive and rebuild. For Jaziel, every step he took now felt charged with purpose. The once dark corridors of Westbridge High had transformed into spaces of potential, where every whispered conversation and every tentative smile contributed to an emerging culture of inclusion and understanding. Even Tavian Browning, who had been the ringleader of his torment, was seen in a different light, a troubled individual wrestling with his own demons, his earlier arrogance now tempered by introspection and regret. The school's climate was shifting, the relentless cycle of bullying beginning to unravel as empathy and shared vulnerability took root. By the end of that transformative period, Jaziel had not only begun to heal his own wounds but had also sparked a movement among his peers, a quiet revolution of support, resilience, and hope. In his journal entries, he recorded the evolution of his feelings, from the searing pain of isolation to the warm embrace of a community that had finally learned to listen. His journey, marked by moments of raw confrontation and tender reconciliation, became a living testament to the belief that even the deepest scars could give way to a future defined by compassion and unity. In that quiet, reflective afternoon, as the last rays of the setting sun filtered through the high windows of Westbridge High, Jaziel sat with his new friends and mentors, his eyes shining with a determination that belied the hardships of his past. In that moment, he understood that his transformation was far from complete. It was an ongoing process, a steady, unyielding march toward a brighter, more inclusive future. And as he listened to the soft murmur of voices around him, each one sharing in the collective hope of change, he silently vowed that his journey would not only redefine his own destiny but also serve as a beacon for others seeking to rise above the darkness of bullying and despair. In the days following that fateful confrontation in the hallway, a palpable shift began to ripple through Westbridge High. The atmosphere that had once been thick with cruelty and whispered jeers was now stirring with cautious hope, as if every student was slowly awakening to the possibility of change. It was during one of those pivotal days that the school administration, spurred by mounting pressure from concerned parents and the quiet revolution among the students themselves, decided to hold a large, school-wide forum on empathy, resilience, and the power of personal transformation. That morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through tall, stained windows, Jaziel arrived at the auditorium with a mix of apprehension and determination. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the painful memories he had endured and the hard-won strength he had gained. In the days before, many had ridiculed him, casting him aside as the new kid with a hidden temper. Now, however, he was recognized as someone who had sparked a conversation about the very nature of strength and vulnerability. Inside the crowded auditorium, rows of chairs were filled with students, teachers, and even some parents who had come to witness this unprecedented meeting. At the front, a panel of speakers had been arranged: the school principal, a couple of trusted teachers known for their progressive approaches, and a local youth counselor renowned for her work with at-risk teens. The topic of the forum was "Rising Above, Turning Pain into Empowerment," and the air was charged with anticipation. As the lights dimmed slightly to focus attention on the panel, Jaziel was unexpectedly called upon by the moderator, a gentle, articulate woman named Maribel Kincaid, who had played a key role in supporting those affected by bullying at the school. "We believe that each one of you has a story that can inspire change," she began, her voice warm and inviting. "Today, we'd like to hear from someone who has turned personal hardship into a beacon of hope. Jaziel Washington, would you share your journey with us?" A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Jaziel. For a long moment, he hesitated at the podium, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Memories of bitter laughter, isolation, and the adrenaline-charged moments of self-defense flashed through his mind. But then he took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice low and steady at first, gradually growing in strength and clarity. He recounted the days when every sneer and every whispered insult had made him feel invisible, a ghost wandering through corridors where he longed for a safe space. He spoke of the nights in which he trained in solitude, his only companions the rhythmic thuds of punching bags and the quiet guidance of his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood. With each word, he painted a vivid picture of his inner battle, how he had transformed the sting of cruelty into the fuel for his own resilience. He told the audience how, in a moment of unbearable pressure, he had revealed not only his physical prowess but also the depth of his compassion when he stopped to help a bully who had hurt himself in the melee. That unexpected act of kindness, he explained, had been as powerful as any punch he had ever thrown. As Jazil's story unfolded, the auditorium seemed to breathe in unison with him. Students who had once joined in his torment now sat in reflective silence, while others, eyes glistening with empathy, nodded as they recognized fragments of their own struggles in his narrative. The raw honesty with which he spoke resonated deeply. His words were not a call for vengeance, but a plea for understanding, a reminder that every individual, no matter how hurt, could choose to rise above their pain. Midway through his speech, an unforeseen moment occurred. From the back of the room, a soft voice joined the conversation. It was Roderick, a quiet student whose earlier admission during the bullying incident had stirred controversy, now stepping forward with his own story of regret and transformation. "I used to laugh at others to hide my own hurt," Roderick confessed, his voice wavering but sincere. "But hearing Jazil, I realized that strength isn't about the power to hurt, it's about the courage to heal." His words, though simple, added a profound layer to the dialogue unfolding on stage. That unexpected interjection sparked a chain reaction. One by one, other students began to share their experiences, stories of silent suffering, of overcoming the pain of exclusion, and of the small acts of kindness that had helped them find their way out of darkness. In that moment, the forum transcended its original purpose. It became a cathartic space where vulnerability was celebrated as the foundation for true strength. The air was thick with a mix of emotions, sorrow for the past, gratitude for the present, and cautious optimism for the future. By the end of the session, as the panel thanked the speakers and the audience erupted in heartfelt applause, Jazil felt a warmth he had never known. He realized that his journey, marked by scars and struggles, had now become a source of light for others. The forum's success was not measured by the number of accolades or the resounding cheers, but by the genuine connections forged that day. In that shared vulnerability, a movement began to take shape, a promise that Westbridge High could transform into a community where empathy reigned, and every voice, no matter how small, was heard. As the meeting dispersed into animated conversations in the corridors, Jazil stepped outside with a deep sense of fulfillment. The once cruel echoes of the hallways had given way to whispered plans for change, a mural to celebrate unity, a student council initiative for peer mediation, and even a proposal for a community art project that would capture the resilience of every individual who had struggled in silence. In that transformative chapter, the seeds of a new, more compassionate culture had been sown, and Jazil knew that his journey was far from over. Yet, for the first time, he felt not only seen but truly understood, a beacon of hope in a world that had once cast him aside, now shining as a testament to the power of turning pain into empowerment. In the gentle embrace of early summer, the corridors of Westbridge High had transformed into a living canvas of hope and renewal. What once were battlegrounds of sneers and isolation had given way to a vibrant community determined to celebrate resilience and forge new beginnings. The final weeks of the school year arrived with a quiet intensity, as if the very air around the building pulsed with promise. Jazil Washington, once the target of relentless mockery and cruelty, now walked those same halls with a calm dignity and a newfound purpose that resonated with every step. On the day of the long-awaited school assembly, the auditorium was filled not with jeers but with an expectant silence. Parents, teachers, and students gathered in a spirit of transformation, eager to witness the culmination of a journey that had redefined what it meant to be strong. The principal, visibly moved by the dramatic changes within the student body, took the stage and spoke of the need for compassion, understanding, and a commitment to right past wrongs. His words, sincere and reflective, set the tone for what was to come, a celebration not only of academic achievements but of personal triumph over adversity. As the assembly progressed, Jazil was called upon to share his story. With a voice that was both steady and imbued with raw emotion, he recounted the painful memories of relentless bullying, the harsh words that once made him feel invisible, and the loneliness that had seemed to echo through every dark night. Yet, he also spoke of the training that had honed his inner strength, the unexpected moments of kindness that had shown him the possibility of change, and the pivotal conversation with his mentor that taught him that true power lay in compassion rather than revenge. His words poured out like a heartfelt confession, drawing tears and nods of agreement from the audience. In that moment, the auditorium was no longer an arena of past cruelties, but a sanctuary where every voice, once silenced, was now uplifted by a shared commitment to change. An unexpected twist unfolded as the assembly reached its climax. From the back of the room, Tavian Browning, the ringleader of the bullies who had once tormented Jaziel, rose to his feet. His face, marked with an expression of remorse and vulnerability, trembled as he approached the stage. In a hushed, hesitant voice that barely carried over the silence, he offered a public apology for his actions, admitting that his cruelty had been driven by his own insecurities and a misguided need to assert dominance. His words, sincere and unpretentious, resonated deeply with the assembled crowd, sparking an outpouring of understanding rather than further derision. The atmosphere shifted palpably, as if the admission had broken a long-held barrier between oppressor and victim, transforming the space into one of mutual recognition and the possibility of healing. In the weeks that followed, Westbridge High became a beacon of transformation. Under the guidance of thoughtful teachers and supportive mentors, the school introduced new initiatives focused on empathy, peer mediation, and restorative justice. Workshops replaced punitive measures, and students were encouraged to share their experiences, turning painful memories into catalysts for growth. Jaziel, once defined solely by the scars of his past, emerged as a natural leader. He organized community art projects, where murals on school walls depicted stories of struggle and triumph, and he even began tutoring younger students who found themselves battling similar demons. His journey had not only reshaped his own identity but had ignited a subtle revolution among his peers, a collective pledge to rebuild a community where every voice was heard and every wound, no matter how deep, could eventually heal. On a warm afternoon at the close of the school year, the transformation was celebrated in a final, poignant ceremony held in the refurbished school courtyard. Under a clear blue sky, with vibrant banners fluttering in the gentle breeze, Jaziel was honored with an award for courage and leadership. As he stood before an audience of proud teachers, supportive parents, and hopeful students, he reflected on the long and winding path that had led him to this moment. His eyes, once clouded by pain and isolation, now shone with the light of possibility. The same corridors that had once echoed with mocking laughter were now filled with applause and genuine smiles. In that powerful moment, the legacy of his journey was sealed, a legacy defined not by the cruelty of his past, but by the strength and compassion that had emerged from it. And so, as the sun dipped low on that remarkable day, casting long shadows that mingled with the bright hues of renewal, Jaziel Washington stepped forward into his future. A future where the trials of yesterday were transformed into the building blocks of tomorrow, a future where every challenge was met with a courageous heart and every scar told a story of resilience and redemption. In that final, triumphant hour, the transformation of a once-mocked boy into a beacon of hope was complete, affirming the timeless truth that even in the face of relentless adversity, the human spirit can rise, heal, and inspire a better world. In my view, the ending of this story is a powerful testament to the transformative nature of resilience and compassion. Jaziel's journey, starting from the isolation and cruelty he endured as the new kid, to his emergence as a confident and empathetic leader, illustrates that true strength isn't defined solely by physical prowess, but by the courage to rise above adversity and inspire change. What makes the conclusion so compelling is the unexpected twist where even his former tormentors begin to confront their own insecurities and guilt, paving the way for healing within the entire community. This finale isn't just a happy ending, it's a call to recognize that our scars can become the foundation for growth, and that when we open our hearts to forgiveness, we create the space for hope and renewal. Ultimately, the story leaves us with a stirring reminder: no matter how dark our past, the light of compassion can guide us toward a future where every voice is valued and every wound can begin to mend.